On Chapter 15 out of Pipe Welding Procedures. This chapter is called Qualification of the Welding Procedure and the Welder. So I've got a... Aha! As you all know, Western is an AWS accredited testing facility. But in order for us to test you guys and for those papers to have any validity, we have to follow a certain procedure set forth in the American Welding Society Code. D1, we actually use the D11 structural code, AWS D11 structural code. Most companies are going to use the ASME code, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Okay? You should remember that, memorize that. American Society of Mechanical Engineers. They write all the codes that are pertinent to pressure piping, pressure vessels, power plants, most of the chemical plants. ASME wrote those. AWS, American Welding Society, I believe they've written 6 different codes. D11 is D1.1 is the most common. It's the structural welding code. For those of you that are in 1840, that's what you're welding to. They've also written a bridge building code and several other little codes and recommended procedures. They've written an awful lot of recommended procedures. AWS, well, let me see. There's one more I want to tell you about. API, the American Petroleum Institute. They're the ones that do the cross-country pipeline, oil and gas refinery type stuff. This stuff out in the oil field, they're the ones responsible for that. Their most common code that we use around here is the 1104 cross-country pipeline code. The thing that all these have in common is you have to have what's called a qualified welding procedure to weld to. And a qualified welding procedure, the way you get one is you make a practice weld. You'll send in your best welder, and that welder is going to be bringing samples of material that you're going to be welding out there on the actual job. He's going to be bringing the actual pipe. He's going to be bringing the actual welding rod. And we're going to refer to the welding codes and see what criteria they have to meet. And then he's going to make a weld. And while he's making a weld, I'm going to record what's called the essential variables. Okay, what's an essential variable? Well, the word variable tells you it's something that's going to change. One essential variable would be your amperage. How hot are you going to run? Okay, that's one variable. Your voltage, another variable. What type of material are you going to use? What type of welding electrode are you going to use? These are all essential variables. They can change from one job to the next. What type of welding process are you going to use? Is it going to be stick? It's going to be TIG? It's going to be MIG? It's going to be dual shield? All essential variables. So the welder comes in and he sets up a weld. And typically we'll do it in the 6G position. If it's a pipe test, we'll do it in the 6G position. Well, is he going to weld it uphill, or is he going to weld it downhill? Another essential variable, direction of welding, direction of travel. So he'll fit it up, he'll tack it up, and we'll record the type of material, the welder's name, the company, and all that stuff, and he'll start his weld. Well, then I'm going to record his inches per minute, his travel time, putting that root pass in. How long did it take him to run one bead with his welding machine? I'm going to record that. Because from his travel time and the amperage, there's a formula that we can use to determine the heat input. And all of this stuff will get recorded on a piece of paper called the Procedure Qualification record. Procedure qualification record. Or the PQR. That's the first document you need to get a welding procedure specification. It's the first document you have to qualify welders. Once we have a PQR, and we've done all of the destructive tests on this piece of pipe, we've done tensile pulls, we've done face bends, we've done root bends, whatever the code says. Once we're done with all of that and everything breaks okay and it meets the required mechanical properties, then we can write a welding procedure specification. Welding procedure specification. What a welding procedure specification does is it sets the parameters, the limits that you can follow to make welds that would duplicate what we did here in our test specimen. Okay? For example, we could say, let's say that he welded it with a 1/8 inch electrode. Okay? But our welding procedure specification may say that you can use a 332 electrode up to a 532 electrode. So it gives you a range that you can use. Let's say that he made that using 110 amps. Okay? Our welding procedure specification might say you can use 85 to 130 amps. So again, we've set a range, parameters that you can have to stay within to qualify that weld to meet the requirements of that procedure. So all it does, the welding procedure specification is, you can think of it as a guideline for you to make a weld that's going to match what that fella did, or guy, or gal, whatever. And then your welding procedure specification then is abbreviated a WPS. Okay? You should remember these letters, PQR and WPS. For those of you that don't have Pipe Welding Procedures book, this is also in, some of the stuff is very similar to it. Chapter 31 in Modern Welding. Chapter 31 in Modern Welding, you can follow me fairly close. So welding procedure specification. Well, so now we've got a qualified welding procedure and we've written a welding procedure specification. Now you come in to this company saying, I'm a golden arm. I'm an expert welder. Give me a test. Well, you can't go to work for that company until you take and pass a certification test under the ASME code. Under ASME, anybody that works for Acme Pipeline has to take and pass a test administered by Acme Pipeline. AWS is a little bit different. They use pre-qualified procedures, and you don't really have to go and test for every company, but generally you do. Most companies will require that you take a test. So you come in and they're going to give you a test. When you're done, that test is called a welder performance qualification record. Now here's where I differ with textbook Modern Welding. I think the fellow that wrote Modern Welding got this wrong. He calls it a welding procedure qualification record, when in all of my experience WPQR stands for welder performance qualification record. So he and I are at odds in that particular instance. In any case, this is the document that will be issued to you by the company that you're going to work for, showing that you have taken a test in accordance with their WPS, which in turn was based on their PQR. And so it's got a trail. Your test leads back to this, which leads back to this, which proves that whatever you weld is going to meet those requirements. You need to understand and remember and know those 3 steps. Let me see what your textbook has to say about this. Okay, I'm going to read from page 237 in your book here. It says, in order to qualify the welder, the fabricator must have him weld a pipe joint in both the horizontal and the vertical positions using the procedure that has been qualified for doing the job. Okay? Well, it used to be they'd give you both of those tests. Anymore, most companies will just give you a 6G pipe test. This test right here in this position will qualify you to weld in any position. It used to be you'd have to take a 2G and a 5G. But anymore, they've gone to just the 6G, qualifying a person to weld in all positions. The fabricator must maintain a record of the tests made by each welder, who is assigned an identification number for use as a reference. No welder is allowed to perform on the job unless he has been successfully qualified by passing a bend test. So you're going to take a welding test, we're going to cut out the test coupons, we're going to bend them, make sure that you're good enough to weld. Usually, that identification number, as it appears on your papers, will be the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. They used to put your entire Social Security number, but with identity theft on the rise, personally, I only use the last 4 digits of a person's Social Security number. When you're on the job, that company is going to assign you an ID number. And it could be a number, it could be a letter or a set of letters, it could be your last initials. And that way they can identify you and tell what weld you have done. And if you're out there working and you make a weld, when that weld's completed, you've got to put your identification number on that weld. So that me, as an inspector, I'm coming through and I'm looking at it after it's all done. If there's anything wrong, we can trace it back to the person that made that weld, and then that person would be responsible for making any repairs. And as I said, if you have more than about a 7% rejection rate, they're probably going to pull your papers or run you off. So you want to make sure, this is a serious business. If I were to go out and ask a room full of 300 people and say, how many of you are welders, raise your hand, and 100 of them raise their hand, then I would say, well, how many of you are certified welders? Well, half those hands would go down. So we got 50 certified welders. And I said, well, how many of you guys can pass a test? Well, if a guy says he's certified, he's going to also say, well, I can pass a test. But my own records will show that only about 17% of people that claim to be certified welders can actually pass a test. So it's not easy. You have to be diligent in what you're doing. You have to pay attention. You have to make sure that you're tying into all those surfaces. It's so easy to have a defect, and you are your own best inspector. You are. You're the guy where it all starts. Okay, now passing one particular procedure will not qualify the welder for welding all different pipe sizes and wall thicknesses, but it will restrict the operator to welding within a specific range of wall thicknesses. Right now, they've gone to what they call the super coupon. See, these welding codes are, in a sense, they're living things. They keep changing, they keep developing. And now, under ASME, if you weld in the 6G position on a 2-inch, I believe it's Schedule 160. It's either Schedule 160 or double extra heavy. That's how they abbreviate it. If you make a weld to that, it's thick enough, the wall thickness is thick enough that it will qualify you under ASME to weld unlimited thickness pipe and unlimited diameter pipe. So most companies are now using what they call the super coupon to test you. And in fact, if you go into the welding lab and you see on the bulletin board, I put some information up there from a company in Chicago that called asking me if we had any welders that could pass their tests. They are in need of welders. B welders, they're paying $28 and something to. A welders, that is a person that can do TIG and stick, they're paying $30 an hour to. And they've got jobs all over the country and also down in the Caribbean where they're looking for welders. And this is the test that they give, the super coupon test. So if you haven't read that already, read it. It's interesting. Okay. So, going back to your book, it says, a welder shall be requalified when there are one or more changes made, which differ from that of the already established procedure. The following changes are responsible for new qualifications. You're working for a company. Well, they've got something new they got to do. You're not qualified under the original test that you took, so they got to give you another test. Okay? A change could be going from carbon steel to stainless steel. Got to take a new test for that. Change could be going from stick rod to gas tungsten, TIG welding. Got to give you another test for that. Anything like that can affect a change. It says a change from a base metal listed under one letter subgroup to one listed under another subgroup. A change from one diameter wall thickness range to another. The direction of welding is changed from the top to bottom or the bottom to the top. That's a change in essential variable. Any change in one of the essential variables I talked about earlier would require that you requalify. Okay? It also requires that they requalify the welding procedure. Another example, an operator who is qualified with an E6010 is not necessarily permitted to use a low hydrogen electrode. If he is qualified with a low hydrogen electrode, it is possible for him to use an E6010 if the job permits. What's a low hydrogen electrode? A 7018. Well, the difference there is 7018 has an F number of 4. 6010 has an F number of 3. 7024 has an F number of, I believe it's a 1. It's either a 1 or a 2. So if you're qualified on this, you could weld 6010 and 7024, but not 7018. If you're qualified on 7018, you could weld either of these. The higher the F number, the more you're qualified to weld those underneath that. So that's another change. Qualifying welders according to a procedure is the responsibility of a qualified inspector. An inspector not only inspects the completed weld samples, but also conducts this test in a systematic manner. There are 3 basic steps in testing: visual inspectance, acceptance quality, and final result. And if you take a test, what I'm going to ask you to do, and it doesn't matter what test I'm giving, first thing I'm going to ask you to do is clean everything up, tack it together, and put it up in position. And I'll inspect your fit up, make sure it's all copacetic. If it is, then I'm going to ask you to put the root pass in, and I'll inspect the root pass. If the root pass isn't good, thanks for trying, have a nice day. If the root pass is good, I'm going to tell you to go ahead and finish the weld. And before you take it down, you're going to come and get me, and I'm going to come in and look at it while it's still in position. And if it's visually okay, then you'll take it down and we'll lay it out, stamp it, and cut out our bin specimens. And then we will go ahead and bend them in accordance with ASME code or AWS code, whatever code we're working to. And if they meet those destructive bend test qualifications, then they're accepted. Basically, ASME and AWS will accept any single defect up to 1/8 of an inch long. If it's longer than that, it's a rejection. It could be more stringent than that. Some sections of the ASME code allow for only a 1/16 acceptance when you're actually out on the job. Under ASME, everybody is qualified to what they call Section 9, welder certification or welder qualification section. And that does allow 1/8 of an inch. But when you're actually on the job, you could be working to like Section 1, which would only allow a 1/16 of an inch. So, an inspector also has the responsibility of terminating any particular test at any time if he finds that the operator does not have the skill required to produce satisfactory welds. You get done here, and you go out and you're ready to take a test, that inspector doesn't even have to let you strike an arc if he doesn't like the way you fit it up. If in his opinion, watching you, you really don't know what you're doing, he'll say thanks for trying and have a nice day. So, when a test weld is completed, further visual inspection is conducted to see that the weld is free from cracks, that there are no arc strikes on the pipe surface, we've already talked about that the melt-through does not exceed 1/8 of an inch, that concavity of the root bead does not exceed 1/16 of an inch, that incomplete fusion is not present, that restarts and tie-ins do not exceed 1/16th to 1/64th of an inch in cavity, and that the cover pass is uniform and smooth. These are all visual things that you're going to look for as an inspector. And those of you that go on to take welding inspection technology, you're really going to get heavy into this because it's very important. Okay, having passed the visual inspection, 4 specimens are extracted from the welded pipe as shown on page 227, comprising 2 face bends and 2 root bends. Doesn't matter if we're doing plate or pipe, that's what we're going to take out for you guys. Those bends must be inspected for the following: slag inclusions, cracks, and incomplete fusion. When we put them in that bend test jig and we bend them, like I said, it's 1/8 of an inch. Any of these things can come up, but if it's less than 1/8 of an inch, it's okay. If it's on the edge, on the corner of your coupon, it can be up to 1/4 of an inch long as it's clean. But if it cracks and we put it under the microscope and I see slag in there, that's an all shit. You're done. Then we're gonna do fill out your papers, and on this paper it's going to be a written document, and it shows the specification of the material being welded, the specification of the filler metal, the type of edge preparation, the preheat and post-weld heat treatment if it was used, the volts and amps, the root opening size, the number of passes, the size of the electrode, etc., etc. These are all, going back to what we did on the very first thing on here, these are all essential variables. They're all recorded on your welder certification papers. So as we give you certification papers and you're going through this program, hang on to them. They're valuable. I've had people call me up that went through this class 5, 6, 7 years ago, never touched a welding machine since they got out of class, call me up and say, "Hey, Les, I just got a job welding." I said, "Well, good for you. Have you been welding much?" "No, I haven't struck an arc since, but I still have my papers." Get your foot in the door. If they see that you passed at one time, they figure that you're good enough to pass again. And even if you aren't ready right then, they can put you to work as a non-certified welder until you get your skills up again to where you can pass that test. So hang on to every one of these papers that we give you. That's about all I've got for Chapter 15. Does anybody have any questions on certification? Anything concern you guys? Oh. Okay, thank you.